Welcome back to our study in the book of Daniel. Today is a special, and I like to call it an insert or a sidebar look at an individual or a topic, in this case about Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He is the blueprint to the antiChrist. And I want to just look at a few things. I encourage you to watch this video before you watch chapter 8. You will understand and see Antiochus in chapter 8 and understand a whole lot more by viewing this background material. And I believe it'll help you in a lot of ways. But thank you for viewing, and let's get underway. As I just mentioned to you, he's the blueprint for the antichrist. The characteristics, things that he does, are things Antichrist will pick up on, but Antichrist in the book of Revelation and in the Great Tribulation will do a whole lot more. All right, these are just some facts to go along with. I've got some maps and actually some archaeological finds of his bust. That's coming up very quickly here. He was born around 2015 before Christ, and he died 164 BC. This is one of those marble sculptures of him. It's probably one of the best ones I could find. It's pretty good minus his nose. He ruled the Seleucid Empire from 175 to 164 BC. All right, this empire this is one of the four. When Alexander the Great died, his empire was divided up into four different empires. It just broke away, and only the Romans brought back unity to a sort of large portion of the former Persian Mede Empire or Alexander the Great's empire. But the Seleucid Empire was definitely the dominant and the largest one. And if you look over to the left, it says the Ptolemaic Empire. They shared basically Israel. Israel started off with the Seleucids, but the Ptolemaics took it over, and it would go back and forth. And all these battles would be getting fought in Israel. And so Israel basically didn't have a whole lot of peace during this time. He wrote to the entire kingdom, all of Seleucid, the empire, that everyone must abandon their customs and their religions and follow the ones that he establishes and that he says. Basically, all the Gentiles did this, as did some of the Jews. They sacrificed to idols, and the Jews one of the things was they had to abandon the Sabbath. No more Sabbath worship. No more sacrifices to the Lord in the temple. They all had to be to their gods. He sends messengers to the Jews in Jerusalem and the cities round about in Judah with orders to follow the customs of the Greeks. So whatever customs that Alexander had for you to follow, now they become law. It's not optional. You have to do it. And so on that list and some of those things that involved, and you'll start to see these things in chapter 8 when we get that far, the sacrifices and libations in the sanctuary, no more morning and nighttime sacrifices at the temple. No Sabbaths and feast days, so their holidays are gone and their day of worship is gone. Pagan altars, temples, and shrines were built, including at the temple and in other areas of Judah and in the greater Israel area. And so because of that, we know then that they sacrificed pigs and unclean animals, and that was by intent. That was to get the Jews to just get used to not having their sacrifices and accept the customs of the Greeks and what Alexander basically had set up, but did not enforce, like, for instance, this one. They had to leave their sons uncircumcised, and they had to forget their laws and their book. We would say today of the Bible. And the laws were, of course, the laws of Moses. Those were no longer allowed. Inspectors, the Jews basically refused. So inspectors were sent, inspector spies is a good way of putting it, to observe that this was obeyed or not. And the penalty was, if you didn't obey this, you were killed then. You didn't get any warnings. Here is a coin with Antiochus on it. So they built the pagan altars in the surrounding cities and burned incense at the doors of the houses. It was just an offense to them to remind them who was in charge. They really did not, Antiochus did not like the Jews. He hated them. He wanted them dead, and he would do anything to give a reason to kill them and to persecute them. And this is one of the other things. They would, the incense to their gods, right? You woke up in the morning and there was a small incense burner there, and perhaps a pocket god laying next to it. All the scrolls found of the law were burned in the altar fires, and those that had them in their possession were killed. He would auction off the office of the high priest to the highest bidder. Therefore, the priestly line was gone, and to the Jews, that was vital that the line continued to be established. But now it was broken, now it was gone, and you had fake high priests that knew nothing about the law and were not even Jewish. Whoever bid the highest could have that office. Yes, it could be a Jew, but it was done once a year. He killed over 44,000 Jews just in Jerusalem, and he plundered the temple, and yes, he had elephants. Antiochus had the support from the Sadducees. We read about them in the New Testament, of course. And the reason he had their support is because the Sadducees never controlled the temple, but they wanted to. And so they did whatever they needed to do so that they could control the temple. The Pharisees, the Zealots, and the Essenes were the powerful opposition against not the Sadducees, but to Antiochus Epiphanes. But yes, they did not get along with the Sadducees either. And so there were real problems here. Antiochus saw this and wanted to exploit it in a big way and use the Sadducees as wedges and actually thorns in the sides of the Pharisees, the Zealots, and the Essenes. Knowing all of this, the stage was set for an historic resistance. On December 15th in 168 BC, the abomination of desolations occurs. Antiochus goes into the temple and sacrifices a pig on the altar. He forces the Jewish priests to swallow its flesh. They made broth of it, and they sprinkled the entire temple area with the broth. A large statue of the Roman god Jupiter was built in the Holy of Holies to be worshipped. And so the entire temple area was desecrated inside and out. "10 miles north of Jerusalem, in this village of Modin, lived the Maccabean family. They would unite the freedom fighters of Israel. They won over years of fighting and controlled much of Judah and Israel from 167 to 134 BC. Here's a map that points out where Modin is, and of course you can see Jerusalem is very close. And we would call this the Hasmonean dynasty, but this is Matthias Maccabeus. This is mainly started off with about being the Maccabean family, and Jonathan and Judas and his son Simon. They all gave their lives for the cause. They were like, how do I want to say this? They would hide and attack and then run away again so that they could attack again another day. And so they used that kind of warfare. And they would pick off the soldiers in smaller groups until they had a smaller army. You can pick them off too. But eventually they all were killed, but they did win. And because of that, they established, like John Hyrcanus, you can see over to the far left, they started a brand new dynasty. And it did drop from the Maccabean era down to, you can see Hyrcanus II down low, and one of his descendants. And that line would continue all the way down to the bottom. Do you see Herod the Great came out of this? Very interesting, isn't it? I close this by reading one of the apocryphal books, 2 Maccabees. If you find the apocrypha books, basically the false writings, the ones that are not in the Bible, take the opportunity and read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, because it was the Maccabean revolt that wiped out Antiochus Epiphanes and got rid of them, and kept their nation, tried to get their nation back right again. At least politically, it was correct. And so this comes from 2nd Maccabees, and I read to you, "But the all-seeing Lord, the God of Israel, struck him with an incurable and invisible blow." This is what happened to Antiochus Epiphanes IV. "As soon as he stopped speaking, he was seized with a pain in his bowels, for which there was no relief, and with sharp internal tortures, and that very justly, for he had tortured the bowels of others with many and strange inflictions. Yet he did not in any way stop his insolence, but was even more filled with arrogance, breathing fire in his rage against the Jews, and giving orders to drive even faster. And so it came about that he fell out of his chariot as it was rushing along, and the fall was so hard as to torture every limb of his body. Thus he who only a little while before had thought in his superhuman arrogance that he could command the waves of the sea, and had imagined that he could weigh the high mountains in a balance, was brought down to earth and carried in a litter, making the power of God manifest to all. And so the ungodly man's body swarmed with worms, and while he was still living in anguish and pain, his flesh rotted away, and because of the stench, the whole army felt revulsion at his decay." That's the death of Antiochus Epiphanes. I want to thank you for viewing and listening in at this. And once again, understand this is a bridge between chapter 7 and chapter 8 of Daniel. And I encourage you to now get to chapter 8 and listen. And what I just read from Maccabees and what I shared with you in the points of his life, what he did in Israel, you will see him and understand him a whole lot better. God bless you, and I'll see you in chapter 8.